Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham. Today, members of the U.S. Senate will take up the budget deal worked out between House Republican Paul Ryan and Senate Democrat Patty Murray. As Gary Lane reports, though, the future of the proposal is uncertain.
Members of the Republican-controlled House gave overwhelming approval to the budget plan.
Our job is to find enough common ground to move the ball down the field on behalf of the American people who sent us here to do their work.
But supporters of the deal may need a Hail Mary pass to win in the U.S. Senate. Tea Party members oppose the agreement because it does little to address the issues of entitlements and out-of-control spending. The nation's debt now stands at more than $17 trillion. And there's the increasingly ugly atmosphere in the Senate. Senate Democrats recently invoked the so-called nuclear option, changing Senate rules to prevent Republican filibusters of President Obama's judicial nominees. Republicans responded by slowing down Senate business. Even some Democrats say the nuclear option has poisoned the atmosphere in the higher chamber and created a somewhat dysfunctional, uncooperative Senate. While the budget deal reverses some harsh spending cuts scheduled for 2014 and 2015, it leaves intact most of the roughly $1 trillion in automatic cuts set to hit the military, domestic agencies, and Medicare providers through 2021. Alan Simpson, former Republican senator from Wyoming, said the budget deal is, quote, a sparrow belch in the midst of a typhoon, and he warned if Congress doesn't address health care, quote, if you don't deal with the solvency of Social Security for 75 years, you're failing your country. Bob Bixby of the Bipartisan Concord Coalition said the president calls it a good first step, but to what? One of the main architects of the proposed budget, House Republican Paul Ryan, said Congress will be asked to revise the tax code next year. Appearing on Meet the Press Sunday, Ryan defended the deal.
And I know what I think is the right thing to do. Getting a budget agreement that reduces the deficit without raising taxes and prevents two government shutdowns from occurring in 2014, in my opinion, is the right thing to do.
Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid says he expects a vote within the next several days. That way, he says, members of the U.S. Senate can return home for Christmas. But Bixby says if it passes, few Americans will be excited. He says it'll be a little bit like a child bringing home a D on a report card instead of an F. Gary Lane, CBN News.
President Obama's promise, if you like your health care plan, you can keep it, has been named the political lie of the year by PolitiFact.com. The website says its readers overwhelmingly agreed with the choice. And PolitiFact adds, for 4 of the past 5 years, the lie of the year has revolved around the health care law. Former Governor Mike Huckabee is considering a presidential run in 2016. In an exclusive interview with CBN's David Brody, Huckabee says, quote, there's a new openness now. He says top evangelical and financial figures who did not back him in 2008 are now encouraging him to run, telling him this time they'll support it.
But I'm a little surprised at the intensity that people feel it. It's not just the obligatory, oh, I'm shaking your hand, I kind of got to say something nice, so the nice thing is probably to say, gee, I hope you run. These are people that look me square in the eye and they say it with conviction.
For the entire interview with Mike Huckabee, you can go to our website, cbnnews.com, and click on the Brody File. Federal prosecutors are readying the case in a homegrown terror plot with a new and disturbing twist. A 58-year-old airport worker reportedly planned to blow up Mid-Continent Airport in Wichita. Agents say Terry Lee Lowen is an avionics technician, and he spent months planning the attack, studying the airport layout and flight schedules. He allegedly planned to detonate a vehicle filled with explosives and take his own life in the operation. Lowen was reportedly radicalized after reading an Islamic extremist material on the internet. On CBN News Watch, our terrorism analyst Eric Stakelbeck said these kinds of plots are not uncommon.
We've seen this time and time again. Since 2009 in particular, dozens of arrests on American soil of usually young American Muslims. Big problem. We see plot after plot. Look, we've had great law enforcement work, Wendy, and a lot of luck, quite frankly. Think back to the Times Square bombing in May 2010. The bomb didn't go off. Underwear bomber, Christmas 2009, the bomb didn't go off. So some luck there as well, but a very persistent threat. And by the way, This suspect in this Wichita plot was an employee of the airport, Wendy. He had a security card which granted him access to sensitive areas. This is a jihadist dream to have that kind of access.
Lowen now faces multiple charges, including trying to provide material support to a foreign terrorist group. The War Memorial Cross on top of Mount Soledad in California must come down. That is the ruling from a federal judge in San Diego. He says the 43-foot cross violates the separation of church and state. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in 2011 that the cross is unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court decided not to take the case. So it went back to the federal judge, but he says the order to take down the cross would be put on hold if there is an appeal. The American Center for Law and Justice calls the decision to remove the cross, quote, deeply flawed. They announced they do plan to file an amicus brief in case of an appeal. Volunteers placed more than 500,000 wreaths on the graves of America's war veterans this weekend. The event is carried out by Wreaths Across America. This is the organization's 22nd year laying wreaths at cemeteries across the nation and marks the largest number ever delivered. Nearly 30,000 volunteers, friends, and family members place remembrance wreaths on the headstones of more than 143,000 veterans at Arlington National Cemetery.
I think the enormity of this place is a very humbling experience.
Just how much that he's missed and how much he's done for us and just how much he's loved.
It really is a sign of respect.
Across the nation, 540,000 remembrance wreaths were placed in honor of our veterans at 908 locations. Wreaths for America's mission is to remember, honor, and teach citizens about the sacrifice of our military veterans and their families. I want to turn now overseas. Israeli troops shot 2 Lebanese soldiers early today along the nation's border. It happened hours after a Lebanese army sniper killed an Israeli soldier. The shootings raised the possibility of renewed fighting in the volatile area, which has remained mostly quiet since a month-long summer war in 2006. An Israeli defense official said Israel had no interest in further escalation. In the past, the Lebanese military has opened fire after saying Israeli soldiers had tried to infiltrate the country. The Middle East is still recovering today from a monster storm that blanketed much of the region in snow. Chris Mitchell has that story now from Jerusalem.
The worst blizzard to hit the region in more than 50 years dumped nearly 20 inches of snow on Jerusalem over 3 days.
It's unbelievable. It's nice. We have drought. We need water. See? So it's very important to have snow and have water.
The historic storm stranded thousands of motorists on their way to Jerusalem. More than 35,000 Israeli homes were without power, some for days. But for many Jerusalemites, they were days of fun without work or school.
I guess I never really thought I'd ever have a snowball fight in the old city, but there you go.
Because it's fun and you miss school and everything. You can make snowmans and eagles.
Monday was the 4th day that schools were closed in Jerusalem and elsewhere in Israel as lingering snow turned to ice on highways. Piles of snow and downed trees were everywhere. When it snows in Jerusalem, it's usually gone within a day or two. But these cars on one of the city's side streets have been abandoned and stranded for nearly 5 days. In Gaza, thousands of residents were evacuated from their homes due to flooding. Probably the hardest hit were some of the more than 2 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon, Jordan, and elsewhere, many of them living in tents. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, thanks to security and rescue forces, many lives had been saved.
The state of Israel is coping very well with the great storm. I believe that we perform better than advanced countries that are hit more frequently by such storms, and we see the results.
Despite the dangers, many enjoyed the wonder of seeing the city of Jerusalem shrouded from what the Bible calls the treasuries of snow. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Former South African President Nelson Mandela was laid to rest this weekend in the tiny village where he grew up. Thousands gathered in a huge white tent Sunday for the state funeral. The audience included world figures from Prince Charles to Oprah Winfrey. Mandela became president of his country after spending 27 years in prison, and he was hailed a hero. His casket was lowered into the ground after military jets and helicopters flew flags overhead. Turning now to the world of sports, Florida State quarterback Jameis Winston took home the Heisman Trophy this weekend, but the road to that honor was clouded with sexual assault allegations. Prosecutors decided not to press charges, and the 19-year-old college football star has refuted those allegations. Still, Winston was the overwhelming favorite for the prize, and he won college football's greatest honor in a landslide vote. He is only the second freshman to win the Heisman. He set records with 3,820 yards passing and 38 touchdown passes. He led the #1 Seminoles to a 13-0 record. Coming up, the online university that's educating students about the nation of Israel. The United Nations Security Council has welcomed the nuclear agreement reached last month with Iran, but warned sanctions will remain in place until a final deal is reached.
As our negotiators seek a comprehensive deal, we wish them the best. Yet until there is a deal, this council must maintain pressure on Iran.
Iran agreed to stop enriching uranium over the next 6 months in exchange for no new sanctions during that period. Israel, however, warns against easing sanctions on Iran. It argues the Islamic Republic's nuclear program is not peaceful, and only international pressure will get Iran to fully dismantle nuclear weapons in its country. The U.S. Senate is pushing for more sanctions if Iran violates the terms of the current agreement. In today's Middle East, it seems fewer young people stand up for Israel. A new online university is hoping to change that by providing both Jewish and Christian students a better understanding of the Jewish state. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell has the story.
Israel is under siege at American universities and at campuses around the world.
Israel really doesn't meet the requirements of a legitimate state.
Now a course from Jerusalem Online University gives students and others the tools to fight back.
So we're trying to give a perspective on not just the history of the ancient and modern state of Israel, but also on the biblical prophetic connection between the modern Jewish people and the Bible, how the ancient history connects with the modern, where it's going.
The Israel course, The Biblical, Historical, and Modern Perspective, is a 7-part movie course that condenses the history and contribution of the Jewish people.
We're dealing with such a complex situation that people tend to have very little information on. And we know the media can be very, very biased.
Rabbi Ken Spiro, one of the film's creators, says they're taking a holistic approach on politics, religion, and philosophy.
We show in one of our movies, Israel Inside. It's such a dynamic, creative, positive force in history, yet why Israel has been, the Jewish people have been the most hated people in human history.
When people think about Israel, they think about war, or religion, or even falafel.
The Israel Inside course focuses on modern Israel, its advances, and contributions to the world.
But to me, when I think about Israel, I think of the triumph of the human spirit. Israelis, surrounded by enemies, have turned a desert with hardly any natural resources into a flourishing, productive, and caring society.
Spiro presents 2 of the videos.
In recent years, the Jewish people's connection to the land of Israel has become somewhat of a contentious issue. But in fact, every year, more and more archaeology is unearthed that clearly demonstrates the Jewish people's ancient connection to the land of Israel.
One of his favorites is The Edge of History.
And that's about prophecy and the end of days. And the reason I love that material so much is, of everything I present as an educator, it's probably the most condensed. It's not only gives the whole sweep of what Jewish history is about, but what it focuses on is current events, what's going on now.
The final class teaches students how to effectively stand up on behalf of Israel.
Every individual has the ability to communicate for Israel, to inspire people about Israel, and to educate people about who Israel really is.
Spiro believes using truth and little-known facts about Israel will help people make their own decisions about Israel and the Jewish people. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Up next, a chance to sit down, sip tea, and have a level-headed discussion about one of the most explosive topics of our time. The story when we come back. The debate over same-sex marriage is often framed as a culture war, but some people are trying a different approach, a civil discussion of the issues. A church recently sponsored a conversation on marriage in St. Louis, where both sides listened to what the other had to say. Heather Sells has that story.
Most of us are all too familiar with the battle over marriage.
Homophobia's got to go.
It's grown full of angry activists, soundbite slogans, and seemingly no common ground. That's why one church rented a nightclub in downtown St. Louis and invited both sides for an evening of calm discussion over the red-hot topic. Taking center stage, gay philosopher John Corvino and Christian philosopher Matthew Lee Anderson.
What's happening here in St. Louis breaks new ground in that it provides a different way to talk about one of the most divisive issues of our day. In fact, the event is billed not as a debate, but as a reasonable conversation.
So much of the marriage debate that we see in public on stage does involve the sound bites, the zingers, the how do I slam this guy and get everybody to cheer and yell and laugh and clap. And we want to do something different.
A non-denominational evangelical church, The Journey, organized the evening. It drew a younger crowd with a wide range of beliefs, but all hoping for a deep exploration of the issue.
We're really honestly just wondering what both sides have to say. I'm happy that it's even happening in general, that it's something that people are talking about.
I think people should support homosexuality and gay marriage and all those things. And I find it interesting that people are so against it, just, from a religious standpoint.
As the evening progressed, it became clear that Corvino and Anderson, while calmly sipping tea, would not shy away from speaking to the hardest points, like this on equality.
Conceptions like fairness and equality are massively disputed here. Sure. The LGBT movement has done a very good job of branding itself and claiming equality. And I think there's just a fundamental disagreement over what the conditions of equality are.
And the value of marriage for gays.
Relationships are good for people, and marriage is good for relationships. Marriage is a way of recognizing people as the family unit they understand themselves to be.
Also addressed harassment of gays and intolerance for Christians.
So it may be the case that in many rural communities and suburban communities, LGBT people experience severe hostility and repression, and that's unfortunate. But it is also the case that if you get into an elite context in the academy, in Hollywood, in New York, and some of these places, there are genuine social costs that people with conservative positions on human sexuality pay.
What seemed to make the evening work, Corvino and Anderson's willingness to engage on all questions while showing humor along the way.
I'm interested in a Christianity that thinks not only about our current situation, but that thinks 500 years down the road. And if we...
That's a lot to have on your mind.
It's a lot to have on your mind, but I think it's actually a responsible thing to do, to think multi-generationally about this.
In the end, no one converted to the other side, but those we spoke with felt better informed and grateful that neither side turned on the other.
I think it's good that there's a dialogue going on, that, it's not a us versus them.
It's natural to disagree. That's just human nature. But to be able to be, poignant, but at the same time, not offensive and just open about that dialogue, I thought was awesome.
I come from a Christian background, and so getting to hear both sides and getting to especially hear John coming from the atheistic view and getting to hear his perspective was really enlightening.
As the church seeks to find its voice in a culture that frequently dismisses biblical views, such forums could pave the way. Author and speaker Eric Metaxas says believers must explore a variety of approaches. The key, he says, showing boldness, humility, and love.
If your heart does not break for somebody struggling with same-sex attraction, you have no business talking to them or even about them. We're called to love people, right? And so if people don't see that love, how are they not going to tune us out?
If it's up to Corvino and Anderson, they'll take this show on the road. A small step, perhaps, but one that could lead the way for addressing an issue that affects us all. Reporting in St. Louis, Heather Sells, CBN News.
This time of year, it is pretty common to see snow-covered roofs in the Midwest, but one house in Wisconsin is covered with something a little sweeter. The 6-foot-tall gingerbread house, complete with a sugar-frosted roof, is on display at the Holiday Inn in Stevens Point. The structure cost a couple of thousands of dollars and required a lot of help from hotel staff.
One of the hardest parts was moving it from where it was originally made into here. It's 550 pounds, maybe a little more.
We made what is called royal icing. That's all the white sugar.
Now, this isn't the first time the hotel has tackled this project. Last year's gingerbread house stood at 4 feet.
Last year I said bigger and better, and they most definitely got bigger and better. It'll be better. I don't know how much bigger we can go.
Well, right now, the world record for the largest gingerbread house measures about the size of a 25-meter swimming pool. So some work to do there. Well, that is going to do it for this edition of CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. And take the time to tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make it a marvelous Monday, everybody.